First step for creating one of my composite pieces is throwing the two separate pieces, trimming them, and then attaching them. And then I map out the piece with the pattern that I want to use. That's probably the most difficult part of the whole process, just making everything even. And after that, I'll start the carving. I get asked a lot why I put the pieces back in as I'm carving, and there are a few different reasons for that. First one is I don't want the piece to collapse on itself as I'm working. It probably wouldn't, but I would rather be safe. But then that leads to the second reason. It does take a while to carve all the pieces out, usually probably a few hours minimum, depending on how complex the piece is. The top of the piece is going to dry out a lot faster as I'm working on it, since I am removing the pieces. And if I left them out, the surface area would increase so much that the piece would be what's called bone dry at the top by the time I'm done. And I could keep spraying it down, but that's a lot of extra work, and putting the pieces back in just helps it dry a lot more consistently. So if I keep the pieces in, it won't completely dry out. And this is porcelain, so that's especially important because it does have a higher shrink rate than a lot of other clay bodies. So drying unevenly could cause the piece to warp and crack, especially during the firings. And even if I might not see it at this point, it could show up later after the glaze firing, for example. And the glaze firing is really where the most shrinkage happens, so that's often when the cracking will show up. So basically, I'll just get a lot more time to work on the piece safely without it warping or drying out too fast or collapsing or anything. So like I said, the top of the piece is already pretty dry at this point now that I'm done with all the carving. So I'll start my favorite part of the process, which is taking all the little pieces out. Depending on the size of the piece and again how complex it is, I might let it sit for a little bit just so the bottom areas that I just carved can catch up and dry out a little bit more. And while I'm waiting, I'll have it wrapped up in plastic. In this case, it all seemed like it would be pretty okay to go ahead and start right away, especially since the top has already dried out quite a bit and I wouldn't want to wait much longer to take the pieces out. One of the cool things about clay is that it's pretty much endlessly recyclable, so all the little pieces I'm taking out aren't going to get thrown away or anything. I'll be able to recycle all of them and turn them into a new piece. Now that all the pieces are out, I'm gonna go back and add some in. I have some domes and then I have some teardrop shapes that I'm gonna attach. I usually like to add some three-dimensional elements after I do the filigree carving, otherwise I find it looks a little flat. And when I do the glazing, I do like to highlight these three-dimensional pieces. I just think it's a little more interesting than leaving it with only the carvings. I'm also going to do some slip trailing, but before that, I have to do my least favorite part, which is cleaning up. So I'll use a paintbrush with some water and go around and just clean up all these edges everywhere. They always get left over from the carving and they'll be super sharp if I don't smooth them out before the firings. I'm using a glue syringe to do this slip trailing, and then after a little more cleanup, she's done.